Welcome to Banyan Books, Branches of Wisdom, celebrating the joy of bright ideas and heartful lifelong learning. Branches of Wisdom is a series of intimate conversations with the world's most influential authors and visionaries. We explore spirituality and the human mind, ecology and culture. Most episodes are recorded with a live audience. You can join our live events and submit questions to your favorite guests. Check out our upcoming schedule at banyan.com. Since 1970, Banyan Books has been a rich oasis at the crossroads of wisdom and philosophy, offering resources for humanity's evolving paths. We're a locally owned, independent bookstore in the heart of Vancouver's Kitsilano neighborhood. Visit us in person or shop online at banyan.com. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews for the podcast. And now, enjoy. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Branches of Wisdom, the Banyan Books podcast. I'm your host, Ross McKeechee, and very excited today that we have as our special guest, Kabir Helminski. Now, before we get to his formal introduction, Banyan Books acknowledges that although we have people joining us from all over the world for these live streaming events, the physical location of Banyan Books and Sound is on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Our guest today, Kabir Helminski, was the first Westerner recognized as a sheikh, or elder, in the Mevlevi Order of Sufism, which dates back to the 13th century and is based on the works of the great poet and philosopher Rumi. As a renowned Sufi teacher, he is one of the foremost translators of our time of Rumi and other Sufi literature. For more than 40 years, Kabir's focus has been developing and sharing a contemporary approach to Islamic concepts and practice, both within the Islamic community and outside of it. In 1980, he and his wife Camille founded and began co-directing Threshold Books, one of the foremost publishers of Sufi literature. Now Kabir and Camille are co-directors of the Threshold Society. Among others, our guest is the author of the now classic book, Living Presence, The Sufi Path to Mindfulness and the Essential Self. His translations of Rumi are among the most popular and respected for their literary faithfulness and beauty. His books have been translated into Spanish, Italian, Dutch, German, Turkish, Russian, and Indonesian. In 2001, he was the first Muslim to deliver the prestigious Harold M. Witt Lectures on Spirituality in Contemporary Life at Harvard Divinity School. Kabir and Camille live in Louisville, Kentucky, and he now focuses on Sufi music, writing, teaching, and developing a program of spiritual education with an international team of scholars. Today, Kabir Helminski is with Banyan Books in conversation about his newest book titled The Mysterion, Rumi and the Secret of Becoming Fully Human. The 13th century poet and mystic, Rumi is one of the world's most popular spiritual voices, known and loved by people of many faiths and worldviews for his rich metaphors, images, poems, and stories. In this new book, Kabir Helminski gives us a contemporary lens through which to view and understand Rumi's teachings of the Mysterion, the unifying concept that bridges the human and the divine, and that connects the individual soul with spiritual reality. If you'd like to learn more about today's honored guest, please visit his website, www.sufism.org. That's sufism.org. Banyan community, please join me in a very heartfelt welcome to Kabir Helminski. Kabir, thanks so much for being here.
Very happy to be here. Thank you for this broadcast. Thank you for Banyan Books continuing to serve a vital purpose. And by way of further introducing myself, my connection to the Mevlevi tradition actually began in Vancouver, when in 1980 I was invited by Rashad Field to visit his center in North Vancouver. And really, this was the beginning of my contact with the tradition. The statement that I'm the first Westerner to be recognized by the Mevlevi tradition, that deserves some qualification. It's true in the sense that I was the first to be recognized by the Mevlevi Order in Turkey. Actually, some of my friends in British Columbia and elsewhere were named sheikhs by my own murshid and teachers, Suleiman Dede. And so that deserves some clarification, because Suleiman Dede appointed a number of people in teaching roles. And but it was some years later when my own connection to the tradition in Turkey and the people who had, you might say, the highest authority, namely Rumi's family, offered that recognition to me. So the Mevlevi path, the path of Rumi, has been my life and the life of my wife Camille as well. And in this book, I've tried to share something from inside the tradition that would be interesting, useful, inspiring to people who are both new to this, as well as people who may have been on this path for a long time.
I just want to backtrack slightly, Kabir. You mentioned Rumi's family. Are they still actively playing a role? I had no idea that is there literally a family lineage that's carrying on that tradition?
Yes, and the the tradition has been, in each generation, there is a what's called the Chelebi. The Chelebi is the leader of the tradition, not necessarily a spiritual teacher himself, but the one who sort of holds a position of offering recognition to people who represent the tradition. It's also connected with something called the International Mevlana Foundation, which also has a Turkish name. And so, yes, we're now with the 24th or so generation of direct descendants of Rumi, many of whom in different generations have held this post of responsibility for the tradition around the world. So, and my own appointment goes back to a man named Jalaluddin Chelebi, who in 1990 gave me his support and asked me to represent the tradition. So that's a little bit, and I think I've had 3 or 4 generations of Rumi's family in my own home at various times. So it's a beautiful family. It's beautiful in what they represent, and they do it with a light touch and with modesty. And they are people of a really extraordinary spiritual courtesy, the quality of character that I've met in these people has been an example for me.
In the book's glossary, you define the term Mysterion as follows: the inner capacity that helps the human being to discern the real from the illusory, the innermost essence, the intrinsic meaning of the human. Wondering if you can unpack that a little bit more for us to help us understand it in the context of Rumi and the Sufi tradition.
Yes. The Mysterion is my translation of a word in Arabic and Farsi, which is sir, which is commonly translated as secret. I chose the word Mysterion for a number of reasons. I just thought it had a vibration to it. So they say, and we often see a kind of calligraphy on a banner or an emblem, which says in Farsi, Ya O Muhammad, O Mevlana Muhammad Jalaluddin Rumi, may God bless his secret. So Rumi had this Mysterion. Every one of us has this Mysterion within us, which is what is most intrinsically human about us. And what is most intrinsically human in Rumi's understanding and in Sufi understanding is the capacity to connect with the divine directly from within our own hearts. Rumi says, imagine a magnificent city with palaces and monuments and parks and all the riches a human being could ever desire. But it's lacking only one thing. It's lacking a true human being. Then he says, that beautiful city is the human being. But if we don't actualize the Mysterion within ourselves, we will have failed in the essential task of becoming fully human. So this whole book is really about developing that connection with the real, which is for us a synonym for God. The foremost synonym in Sufi terminology for God is al-haq, which means the real or the truth or the ultimate reality. And so all of spiritual practice is about purifying the heart, removing distortions from the mind, as well as dealing with our own weaknesses and faults in order to purify that essence of ourselves so that it can, through a vibrational shift, come to nearness with the divine friend, with the beloved, some might say. So the fulfillment of our life as a human being is through this connection that is where we find God, where God is closest to us. And by God, well, I hope somebody reading this book will have their sense of the word God transformed, that our spiritual journey is a journey of an ever growing and subtilization and broadening of our sense of what the divine really is. So the divine for us is not a dualistic concept. It's not, well, how shall I say it? It is, well, let me put it this way. We could say, and I think Rumi would agree with this and says it in his own way, that the greatest purpose in life, the greatest experience of a living human being is to come to experience and therefore know the true dimensions of the divine beauty, intelligence, generosity, and love, and more. And we could say much more than that. So, the purpose of life is to know that divine reality experientially and to see the face of God in the material universe and in each other and so forth. So, that theme is repeated in so many ways in this book, even while this connection through the Mysterion has a transformative effect on our humanness, so that as we become more spiritually mature, we become also, God willing, more coherent. We develop our own personal sovereignty through the recognition of divine sovereignty. We grow in spiritual intelligence and spiritual perception. And we also grow in servanthood because there is no, Rumi says, there is no admittance to the divine except through servanthood.
You just mentioned spiritual perception, and that is really a key theme throughout the book. Can you expand on that a little bit? What you mean by that term, spiritual perception?
Yes. Let me read something to you from the book.
While you're looking that up, I'll just remind our live audience that we'll be getting to as many of your questions as we can towards the last 15 minutes. So go ahead and type those into the chat, and I'll read some of those out to Kabir towards the end.
So the Rumi would say that the world looks different to a lover. And here on page 61 of the book, he gives as an example Prophet Muhammad. He says, to the Prophet, this world is plunged in glorification of God, while to us it is heedless. To his eye, this world is filled with abundant love. To the eyes of others, it is inert and lifeless. To his eye, valley and hill are in fluid motion. He hears subtle discourses from sod and bricks. To the vulgar, this whole world is a dead thing in chains. I've never seen a veil of blindness more amazing than this. So Rumi sees love as a cognitive function, not just a state of emotion, but a state that allows a new kind of perception. We cannot truly know another unless we love them. We cannot truly know and appreciate a religion, especially religions not our own, unless we can love another religion. So all of Rumi's writing, and actually he didn't write, he mostly dictated and or expounded spontaneously, but all the words, all the language that came from him can be viewed through the lens of spiritual perception, because he saw the spiritual transformation as, above all, a transformation of perception and an increase in spiritual intelligence. And spiritual intelligence is an intelligence that truly grasps the essence of the human being, the purpose of our lives, and the context in which we live. So, for example, the mystics, the great lovers of God, the saints, and so forth, have spiritual intelligence because, among other things, they know life is temporary. They know that death is a reality. Well, let me put it this way: the end of our life in the material world is limited. our life itself is not limited in the same way. It is something eternal. And we cannot be truly spiritually intelligent if we don't live, as it were, with death in the background. And death in the background gives meaning and beauty to life. So that's just one aspect of spiritual intelligence. Other aspects would include understanding um, what are the true faculties of a human being, and what do we need to do to to assist this continual process of transformation that is possible for a human being. Spirituality, especially Sufism, is a methodology, a lifelong methodology for really purifying us ourselves of distortions and um, awakening the heart and doing the work of the soul. In our understanding, the soul could be understood as the result of the meeting of self and spirit. The self that is divorced from spirit is virtually dead. Such a heart is also dead or lifeless. We can lose our souls, we can sell our souls, but if we live a life in which the self is continually opening to the beautiful relationship with divine spirit, then the self is receiving a transformative energy and the soul is developing. So the soul, in a sense, is a work in progress. And all of human experience contributes to the richness of the soul, which has an eternal dimension. Rumi has an amazing way of teaching us the fundamentals of the spiritual journey. And sometimes he gives us examples that are so profound, and yet they're the kind of thing that a child could understand. I'd like to read you something that is an example of this, I think, and it's called "No Prayer is Complete Without Presence." Oh God, there are so many traps, so many baits, and we are like hungry, greedy birds. Every moment we're caught in some new snare. Even when we might become a falcon or a bird of the heavens. O you who are without need, each moment you free us, and then we fall into another trap. We put grain into our barn and we lose it. Why don't we consider that this loss comes from the gnawing of mice? These little mice have devastated our barn. O soul, first stop the mischief of the mice, then work to gather the grain. Here is a saying of the Master of Masters. He's referring to Muhammad, who said, "No prayer is complete without presence." If there is no if there is no thievish mouse in our barn, where is the harvest of these 40 years of devotion? Why doesn't the sincerity of each day accumulate bit by bit here in this barn? So there's plenty of practical teaching in Rumi's works. And sometimes there's ecstasy, sometimes there's the unitive state of consciousness, but there's also a very coherent, systematic teaching about how the soul can be developed and what we can do with the mice who are eating all the grain we try to store up.
Could you give some examples of what those mice might be representing? What are some examples of the mice in our lives that are eating up our presence?
Well, I'll give you one very powerful example, because there's quite a bit in the book about this, including, I think, a chapter called The Work Soul. But to go into all those things would take, I think, more time than we have. Well, here, I have a list. Here, a list that I give in the book. I'm just going to name 5 things, 5 kinds of mice.
Yeah.
Complaining, the complaining mouse, the playing the victim mouse, the adopting a mask to please people mice, the trying to conform and do as one is told by authorities mouse. And that truly is a mouse. And the blaming and shifting responsibility for our state to something external to ourselves mouse. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciated that list. It's so concise, but I can see all of those operating in myself in different ways at different times.
So can I. So can I.
And even masquerading in spiritual ways, those things as well. Yeah.
Yes. You know, the greatest sin in Rumi's view is not some carnal sin, not earthly desires or even material accumulation, but arrogance and intellectual pride. And in the Quran, there's a story about God creates the human being, and then he invites the angels to come and tells the angels, please honor this human being, my new creation. And all the angels bowed down, except for Iblis. Iblis, who becomes Shaitan or the devil or Diablo. And Iblis says, no, I'm not going to bow down. This human being is made of mud. I'm fire. I'm superior. So no. And besides, I know that this human being is going to be up to some serious mischief. So Iblis refuses to bow down. And then God says, but I know what you do not. Elsewhere, Rumi continues this story and compares Iblis to Adam, the first human being, or the first conscious, complete human being, because Adam actually has a very exalted position in our cosmology, though he made a mistake. And so Rumi says that both Adam and Iblis were aware of the unitive nature of existence. They were aware that God, in a sense, and I know this is a confusing idea, but that God, in a sense, is the true agency in existence. So, knowing this, Iblis, who is full of pride and arrogance, says, oh God, you're the one ultimately in charge. You made me do it. Whereas Adam, who understood the same truth, said, my Lord, I have sinned. So this is the difference between arrogance and humility, from two beings, both of whom understood the same truth.
What I really hear there is a certain maturity and self-responsibility. Is that accurate?
Good, absolutely, absolutely. We are good, yes, because despite this notion that the divine rules, so to speak, every real spiritual teacher always comes down on the side of human responsibility. And every prophet, every saint, every master teaches human responsibility. This is where the action is, where the work is. And while we know that, well, in this more unitive, mystical understanding, we know that we must make efforts. And at the same time, in some sense, we know that even our ability to make efforts is a God given capacity. So there's a saying from some tradition, I don't know if it's Sufism or not, no one reached God through their own efforts, and no one who didn't make efforts ever reached God. So this is a way of bringing together the paradox, this paradox of truth, that our capacity to remember God, serve the real, really, to remember the real, to remember the true spiritual nature of reality, that reality is much more than this material existence that we get so caught up in. That capacity is the divine realizing itself through individual human witnesses. So yes, responsibility. And there's a chapter in the book on sovereignty, personal sovereignty, really emphasizing that taking responsibility for ourselves, being sovereign over our own inner life, is a must. At the same time, this capacity to reach individual personal sovereignty is deeply related to our recognition of divine sovereignty, because we need to call for help. We need to pray. So much of Rumi's teaching is about, you can view it as a relationship to reality. What is our right relationship to reality? This takes it beyond the realm of conventional religion, conventional piety, and all of these things, to an understanding that we were born as individual souls, consciousnesses within a unified reality. And to find our right relationship with the very nature of reality, to find an intimate relationship with reality, that is the purpose of this spiritual journey. In Sufism and in Islam, there are not two different things. A saint is called a wali, and the wali means someone who is near to God. So that's the idea of sainthood. We don't have a word for sainthood. We have the word wali, which means friend, God's friend. So the whole journey is about reducing what is in the way and coming into a beautiful nearness with the divine. And there's an incredible quote from Ibn Arabi, just to also include another great Sufi master. Ibn Arabi said, and this, for me, this is one of the best expressions of this truth. Ibn Arabi said, "My journey was entirely within myself. But when I came to the presence of my Lord, let's put quotes around that I saw that I was nothing but servanthood, without a trace of sovereignty." So, to me, this describes that the subtlety of that relationship. I'm in the presence of my Lord. I'm as near as a conscious being will ever be to that absolute reality. And in that, you see the I remains in some sense, but you see that all agency is with the divine, all sovereignty is with the divine. And we, at our best, are just an expression of servanthood. Make sense?
It does, and that's something that comes through in the book quite a bit, and you present it in so many different ways. It's a theme running through this movement of developing both our individual personhood, but it's refined and shaped through our relationship with the beloved. And
Yes.
you even talk about towards the end of the book, you talk about the I forget the man's name, who was he fought, and he was also quite a realized master. He was a righteous man who stood up and fought against the French. And
Yes.
you mentioned his kind of his realization of unity with the divine, but then the realization of that next stage, which was returning to a sense of individual relating to the divine. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. There's a very important passage, and it's very near.
Life in the World, I think it is it? Chapter
Yeah,
20.
that's right. And towards the very end of the book, and really this is the end of the book, but I would like to share this. It's called The Place of Rising, a meditation inspired by Rumi. So this is here towards the end of the book. And I will say that much of what's in this passage I'm going to read are images that come from Rumi. And we should appreciate that. I owe this to him. But it also talks very explicitly about this relationship, which is such a mysterious relationship between the self and the real. And this is what is on every, page of Rumi you will ever read. It's different ways that he unfolds this central truth. And that's why we find the same thing. So bear with me. I think this is worth reading for all of us. The work worthy of our love is the work of clearing the heart, to breathe out what needs to be released, then to move into stillness and silence. The root of every problem, every fear, and every loss of hope is the neglect of this conscious heart work. When we live with a spiritual orientation in alignment with the infinite, then we begin to realize a coherence of the soul formed by the magnetism of truth. This is important. Our connection to truth creates coherence in the soul. Within that coherence is peace. Crows may caw, but the fruit still ripens in the orchard. Dogs may bark, but the moon continues on its course. We are moving stage by stage, coming to understand the true dimensions of the real. We are eternal spirit created by love, to know love in every condition of this life. Every circumstance of life is a step on that journey when we welcome every experience in patience and gratitude. The human essence is enriched and matured through this witnessing of our experience. The light of eternity continually shines upon this material world. I'm going to read it again. The light of eternity continually shines upon this material world, as spiritual perception becomes our natural way of seeing, this earth reveals its numinous nature, just as the earth is brought to life in the springtime through friendship with spring. 1,000 flowers bloom through the land when the beloved springtime arrives. Coincidentally, it is spring. Is the earth of our bodies any less than this worldly earth? Conscious breath, the music of glorification, the sacred dance, the inner still point, these will sanctify the body. And now this is directly from Rumi, Mevlevi, Book 6. Through divine omnipotence, the bodies of holy ones have become able to support unconditioned light. God's power makes a glass vessel the dwelling place of that light of which Mount Sinai cannot bear even a speck. A lamp niche and a lamp glass have become the dwelling place of that light, by which Mount Kaf and Mount Sinai are broken open. There he's referring to a passage in the Quran that likens the divine light to a lamp in a niche that is lit by an oil neither of the east nor of the west, but glows though no fire has touched it. It's an incredible description, possibly of the human nervous system. Continue. Know that the bodies of holy ones are the lamp niche, and their hearts are the glass. This lamp illumines the firmament. The light of the heavens is dazzled by this light, and vanishes like the stars in this radiance of morning. End of the Rumi passage, and one final paragraph. But sometimes it seems that there are only the bare branches of January, and the nightingales have hidden themselves and are mute, because the nightingale is silent without the rose garden, and only the crows are cawing as the night darkens. This is the time to remember that the sun of divine knowledge has no motion and never sets. That sun rises within the clear soul who is able to support its unconditioned light. The body can be the lamp niche in which the sun of divine knowledge rises. Find the Spirit's rising place in yourself. After that, wherever you go, you will have that radiance. Any place you go will be the place of sunrise. So I think that captures the message of this book as well as anything can. That we are here, and it connects the fact that we have bodies and we have a nervous system. and if we let the body just be concerned with bodily desires exclusively, we will not fulfill our purpose. But if we realize that this body and this nervous system can become the place where unconditioned light is received, and where literally our nervous system and our physicality is transformed by this relationship with a higher vibration, with a purer light, then we can fulfill the purpose of being born into this human existence.
Kabir, I would like for us to get to some of the audience questions. But before I do that, I just wanted to ask you one more thing that really stood out to me from chapter 21, which was titled Oneness on the World Stage. And here you explore how the reality of oneness can allow us to move beyond conflict and polarization, or the us versus them mentality on the world stage. You also speak about control systems. There's so much there I wanted to dive into with you, but then the last two sentences of the chapter, they kind of really jumped out at me. And I wanted to ask you about that. You write, whether you identify with Buddha, Jesus, or Muhammad, you have an exemplar that did not make material accumulation a priority. The way of voluntary simplicity is the best road to health, happiness, justice, and humanity's survival. I really wonder if you could talk a little bit more about this way of voluntary simplicity and how it can have such a big impact.
I'm sure there are people who can speak much better than I can on that subject, but I believe at the heart of it is contentment and gratitude. To know that the greatest contentment, the greatest richness comes from contentment. The greatest happiness comes from giving our consent to the reality that we find ourselves in. It doesn't mean, of course, that we become passive or that we withdraw from the work of justice and compassion. But we enter that work voluntarily, without hostility, without blame of other souls, even while we recognize the injustice and the evil of certain actions. And you can be a mystic and an activist at the same time. It may not be every mystic's destiny, but I think in the times in which we're living, because humanness itself is so under threat by forces that are moving us to a post-human world, that we have to give, to me, this is the really essential need of this time. And it's an unprecedented need, I believe. There have always been human challenges, but really what we're facing now in terms of the power of those who believe that there's a technocratic solution for every human problem and who deny the very freedom of the human soul, the sovereignty of the human soul and body, and who also deny the reality of the soul as the origin of will and love, which no AI can ever attain, because AI exists only on this material plane. What we truly are exists in a qualitative dimension, not this quantitative dimension. And that's a whole nother subject. Why this human heart is the instrument, the cognitive instrument for perceiving reality qualitatively, and therefore knowing that everything that is truly important is invisible. Friendship, love, courage, generosity, forgiveness, all these things are invisible. The reality is invisible. And this is where the work is. This is where we should direct our primary attention, even while we take care of business in the world and fulfill our practical responsibilities. At this time in human civilization, there is a capacity, the ever-growing capacity of a shallowly technocratic tyranny that is literally opposing the human soul and would like to enslave the human soul. Maybe this is more than you bargained for, but
I know this is fantastic.
So again, this is a whole nother subject. I don't deal with it at great length in this book, but I think this book gives us what we need to do the work of the soul in order to truly be in relationship with that dimension where the real power resides, where the real grace and love and beauty resides. And that is the work of the Mysterion and becoming fully human at a time when our humanness is so threatened.
Thank you. There's a question here from Mina. Mina says, Ba Salam, Ross, and Kabir. What of living in times like this, where individual sovereignty and agency is continuously being taken away? How can we be mystical activists? Thank you.
Well, first of all, by awakening our own conscious will and conscious love, and not allowing ourselves to fall into the hysterical conflicts that would shrivel our souls, but to draw our strength from the divine source and to be custodians of consciousness and also lovers. Rumi represents the archetype of the lover. And it's a beautiful archetype of the spiritual universe. And love is the greatest transformative power. You could say, you could see it as a weapon in this battle, not a weapon meant to harm. So yes, there are some extraordinary poems of Rumi's about the armies of love, and the heroism that comes with people of true faith. By faith, we mean the lived experience of knowing this reality is essentially spiritual, that there's nothing to fear, and that the divine rules ultimately.
Thank you, Mina, for that question. There's one here from John Brozak who says, Kabir, salam alaikum. Did you hear that Sheikh Majid Buel died recently? Yes. A friend professor has written a book called The Dervishes of the North about some of our Sufi days in Vancouver. Mm. It's more of a comment than a question. Do you have any?
Yes. I was aware that Majid Effendi has passed away. God bless his soul. And thank you, John. It's nice that you're with us tonight.
Thank you, John.
As I said, I have a history in Vancouver, and I love Vancouver and British Columbia and my friends. I hope to return one day. It's been too long. So I want to say salam to friends known and unknown in Vancouver and Squamish, et cetera, et cetera.
That's so wonderful to learn you have that connection with this place. I want to thank our live audience for your questions, and as always for your participation. The Banyan Books community is so important to us. And of course, we've been speaking with Kabir Helminski about his latest book, The Mysterion, Rumi and the Secret of Becoming Fully Human. Of course, it's available along with his other books at banyan.com, or you can visit us in person. Kabir, I'm so grateful to have you joining us this evening. And this book is really profound and beautiful, and it really touched my heart deeply. It was just the right moment for me to read this work. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Ross. I'm honored to be here and grateful for this interview, for this time to be with some friends. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for Branches of Wisdom, a podcast of Banyan Books and Sound, Canada's spiritual and healing resource since 1970. Our podcast producer is Jacob Steele. The show is edited by Abdo Habani. Watch all our conversations on YouTube by searching for Banyan Books, or listen on your favorite podcast platform. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews and comments. We love to hear from you. For all our live events, books, and more, visit us at banyan.com.